Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. On the show today, we have a special episode. This is one of three of what we're calling the Plague Dialogues. So we have Ray Johnson, who's at Pacifica University. She describes herself as a somatic geek, does a lot of work in the social justice world. Just a gorgeous human being. She's been coaching me. I've been learning from her. We also have Rafe Kelley, founder of Evolve, Move, Play. He jumps out of trees. He's a man's man. He's a friend of mine. He's also one of the smartest people I know who's been tracking this virus really very closely, looking at the evidence and sort of tracking some of the smartest people out there thinking about it. So we're lucky to have Rafe here. And Ilan Stephani. So Ilan is a somatic coach, works with sexuality, intimacy. She was responsible for a video from Women to Men that was sort of in the after Me Too, was very popular. Also wrote a book about her experiences as a sex worker, and after that, the kind of impact on the world. So you three are so welcome today.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Nice to be here.
All right. So let's start with a bit of a sort of state of play. So today, as of recording, is Sunday, the 22nd of March. Things are moving pretty quick. It'll probably be changed by the time this comes out in a week or so. Rafe, where are we at sort of globally now from your research on this?
So we have a few really localized places where we've seen the impact, but most places are still on the shallow part of the exponential curve. And so we can see what's coming if people are really thinking about it, but it's still kind of easy to ignore. And a lot of what we're going to be experiencing hasn't yet happened. So I've been tracking this since late January. Basically, I'll give you guys the numbers for Italy, because I can't remember the numbers for China, but March 1st in Italy, there were 34 dead. On March 6th, it was 124. Yesterday, 793 people died in Italy alone. That's what an exponential curve looks like. You can go back to Wuhan, China, see the same curve. 6 weeks in, 34 dead. 6 weeks later, 2,000. Okay. So this is right now, the UK, last I looked, was 160. So I think you guys are getting like 30 to 40 dead a day right now. In 2 weeks, you can expect that number to be in the 600s, 700s. Yeah. Same thing here in the States. I guess you guys have restrictions now on travel and non-essential activities.
Yes, Ilan's in Berlin, and they're a little ahead of us, both in numbers and in terms of restrictions. Yeah. Spain, some of my students just flew back from last flight out of Spain kind of thing. Things are pretty locked down there with military on the streets. And in France, you have to have a permit to leave the house. They've got bureaucratic early, very French. And I guess what we're doing today is that was just to set the scene. You know, things are tricky and they're going to get trickier. The emotional tone, there's a lot of fear around. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about trauma. I know Ray and Ilan and I are all interested in that. We'll talk about maybe some business things in terms of how it's impacting teachers. So I just trained 4,000 yoga teachers in how to work online. We put out a free webinar and that was massively successful. We've also set up these embodiment circles online for people to connect online because there's going to be this need for connection that we're seeing. Loneliness, isolation, just lack of touch. You know, this is such a part of many of our work. And, you know, as a friend of mine in Denmark said, who runs a yoga studio, they just made touch and community illegal in Denmark. And that's what we do, right? Yeah. So he had to go online and work that out in a week. So we talked about his journey was on the call. And so let's talk about some of the psychology here. We're not going to be giving any medical advice. We're not going to be saying anything which isn't sort of factually well established, like the stuff Rafe said. We're more looking at the inner side of it, how it might affect embodiment people, and maybe some angles that aren't so common in the newspapers because of our skill sets. So, Ray, can I bring you in? How does it feel to you right now? Like you're in California, there's some cases there. How does it feel? Let's start there.
Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of local context, I live in Santa Barbara, California, and our school is now closed. We've moved everything online. The campuses are locked, and the county of Santa Barbara is in shelter-in-place mode. So we're going out only for medical appointments and groceries, basically. And I think how it's affecting people really, really varies. You asked how it's affecting me. And in fact, it's been interesting because part of what's happened for me is it's really brought me to a very existential place.
Yeah.
It's provided an opportunity to reorient, to reconnect with my deeper purpose for kind of being on the planet. And so in some ways it's scary and alarming, and I'm concerned for people, and I haven't seen my partner for 6 weeks, and God knows when I will see her again. And there's a part of this crisis that really feels as though it's allowing me to reconnect with something that's really important to me in my life.
It feels like almost like a collective death meditation for the world. And having done death meditations many times, I almost feel like a bit better equipped than some of the people this is their first one. Yeah. You know, I also noticed as someone that's had trauma, that's been in war zones, I was joking with Daniela, I was saying, hey, this is just like Tuesday in Afghanistan now. We were kind of laughing and kind of feeling kind of relaxed, and we was like, oh, because we're better equipped for this because of our history. Though, had we not been healed in our work, we might actually be getting traumatized. So maybe we'll come back to that theme. And Ilan, how are things like in Berlin? What's the vibe there?
The vibe, I think, calmed a little bit down during the last days, but now the government published that we are somehow not allowed to gather with more than 2 people outside. So things become pretty fast more mature, I think. And of course, thank you for those numbers. I mean, as alarming as they are, there is something of this, we need each other now in the ways that in which we can support each other without physical touch. And of course, for me, working all about embodiment, this is somehow another existential crisis, because we are already suffering from a deprivation of touch and loyalty and felt sense of a tribe that holds us. And now even shaking your hand is something that is dangerous, that puts so much interesting and existential challenge into our nervous system and into our current world around how do we connect now. So I think there are, in my perception, there are really 2 challenges going on. One is the existential collective death meditation. I want to say I love this term, but it's so true that it's somehow shocking. And the other one is the helplessness and the fear of my death and of being deadly for others that has been there in all times. But I was better equipped around suppressing it. So now I can't afford suppressing it. This kind of vulnerability also touches me. Yeah.
Yeah, in some ways we can say nothing's changed. You know, we're always at risk of death and disease. And I've also seen 2 moves around community. One is the online community aspect, like the embodiment circles, people reaching out, but also local community. Like someone in the street gave me their phone number and said, hey, we've got a local WhatsApp group if we need to support each other. You know, my bag of shopping had broken. They went inside and got me a plastic bag and said, hey, this is a group you should know about. And I'm seeing this local community in that we evolved for millions of years with local community, but for the last sort of 40 or 50 years, human beings have been doing a weird experiment in not having it. And simultaneously, as you say, we live in a touch-deprived society, and all of a sudden touch is being kind of outlawed. Like it might well become a taboo to touch. Like I was hosting this lunch at California before I knew I may have had the coronavirus, and people were knocking elbows and bumping fists. And these are the huggy embodiment people around the table. And it was just such a weird phenomenon to see people not touch.
It's something that you say touches on something very interesting for me around, we have this instinct of I want to survive, and we have this kind of behavior around greed and me first. And there is something underneath that I consider to be more true, and that is my instinct, my need for supporting you. Like it touches me so deeply, giving you a WhatsApp number just because you might use it. you might need it. There is something where I think our kind of safety in unsafe times or in the face of death comes more from, can I be connected with you by supporting you, by listening to you, instead of, can you please fulfill my needs and I don't care about your ones. Very touching.
Wonderful. I think let's return to this idea as a starting point of kind of people being in fight, flight, freeze response, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's a kind of, there's things, other things with that, community and trauma and greed and existential things, but like there's this reduced sense of safety, which maybe traumatized people have anyway. And this need for safety, whether it's in others or in shopping, their consumerism pattern is there, or the yoga people say we need more yoga, the conservatives say it's because the immigrants, the liberals say it's because of Trump, people go deeper into their patterns. And really this, where everyone's operating, or many people operating from an increased level of fight-flight response. Ray, have you got any thoughts about that as our sort of new norm?
I actually think that this is not different from what we've been seeing socially anyway. And I think you've named it exactly right, that increasingly modern society is stimulating and threatening and not supportive enough, that I actually think that the uptick in trauma models, in people talking about trauma, in people developing responses for healing trauma, is not just that we've all of a sudden, got language and techniques for something that's been existing all along. I actually suspect that it's getting worse, that as a society, as a species, we're more traumatized. So I think this is just another quick uptick in a pattern that we've been seeing, at least I've been seeing since I started working with trauma in the late 80s.
Like that question of what does it feel like where you are? What's striking about Seattle right now, and Seattle's the epicenter of the disease in the States. About half of all the deaths have happened here in this county, is actually a sense of levity, right? What people are feeling more than what I see when I go out on the streets is that people are feeling less fear of what's coming and more relief of getting outside of their daily life. When I walk through the streets of my local neighborhood, people are smiling and chatting with each other. Kids are out riding their bikes and jumping their bikes, and people are really chatty. They want to talk to you. And it's as if basically people are so suppressed by the normal kind of work that is expected in our area, that even though the reason that they're being sent home from work is very dangerous, they're not experiencing that right now. What they're experiencing is, I actually got to have a conversation with my wife for an extended period of time. I actually got to spend some time playing with my kids. I got to walk my dog. And so actually what's happening is it's like a party is what it feels like.
Right. There's a way in which being closer to death makes people closer to life. And I've seen this in war zones. I remember the horniest I'd ever been was on my way to Afghanistan. There's a way in which it kind of can bring life, and it can make people reach out, as you say, for community. And I also want to really highlight what Ray said, that, we've had increased child suicide for a while. We've had increased drug addiction, the opioid crisis, the Department of Loneliness in the UK. There's these sort of signs that society has been going wrong in some ways for a while. And now we have these two trends. So on the one hand, the levity or the pro-social behavior, like the person giving me the phone number. But we also have the, mass buying of toilet roll, or the, people who may have had trauma backgrounds. And particularly if people are already, say, close to the poverty line, I think it could feel threatening in another way. As the great philosopher Bruce Willis said, kind of, welcome to the party, pal. There's a way in which kind of like, there's a lot of people that have been living on that edge. I was in San Francisco. A lot of street people have been living a life and death reality for a long time. And now we're all a bit closer to that. So it's a hell of a thing to try and figure out.
Yeah. I mean, the area I'm living in is very affluent tech workers. So, they can all work from home. Their lives are not deeply threatened by what's going on. Their jobs aren't. So I imagine it could be very different in other areas.
But I do want to acknowledge a lot of listeners. I'd say most listeners, say 70 or 80%, have taken a big cut in income. And I think after the existential threat, the sort of financial threat is the next one. You know, I noticed people kind of contract around that, buying on various things is down. And a lot of people are trying to shift to online, but all the yoga teachers I know, all of a sudden their work was just gone. And they didn't have a lot of security. They say the average American only has, you know, a week or 2 weeks worth of savings to live off. Similar in Britain. So there's a whole load of people in our body-mind sector who have just been made very financially insecure.
And it's tragic because especially professionals from the body-mind sector, I think, are trained perfectly for dealing with nervous systems in the fight and flight response, which is by no means like an orientation delivering behavior or perspective or a solution for the situation. So again, coming from a very privileged situation, also in this situation, I also feel this gratitude of recovering from my made-up problems just because it was rainy.
You know what? There's a lot less bullshit happening now.
Yeah, it's like, Ilan, this hasn't been so important, and even more, it hasn't been so real. There is something of my relief being somehow having a breakthrough through my own superficial stuff. This human mood, especially in Germany, around, oh, let's have a bad mood. Yay, good idea. Let's worry about something. And now everything is more touching because it's more alive, because it's more fragile. And it's not now like that, but now we are more aware of that. And I think there is a paradox intervention with a fight and flight response in our nervous system of breaking through, shaking through, and finding some peace underneath that we could have had all those years before as well.
Nice. We time to take a breath. Anyone listening to this, noticing if you're getting tight, getting anxious, getting stressed, shake that off.
Shaking.
Oh.
On the topic of fight or flight, my little sister called me yesterday, and she basically wanted to talk about her husband constantly talking to her about coronavirus, right? And he's like watching every movie where there's a outbreak, you know, every disaster movie. And this is a conversation that Mark and I have had a little bit, but basically it's like, for her, all this information is anxiety producing. For him, consuming the information, I think, feels like a proactive step towards being able to deal with it. And I have the same dynamic with my wife, right? I'm eating the information as fast as possible. And then when I spit it out at her, she's like, oh, that's too much. That's anxiety promoting. And, you know, my own felt sense of this is I haven't felt anxious. You know, people are saying everyone's panicking. If you're worried about this, you're panicking. It's like, it doesn't feel panicky at all. It feels like recognizing something that requires a lot of attention and then being energized by the need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I've been massively energized by this whole thing. And I think part of it is I found constructive places to put that energy. I was like, great, we can get some online groups going. We can help out. I got this message from the NHS yesterday. Some doctors I'm consulting with deep in the NHS, they were saying, you know, things are really falling apart. We're struggling with beds. We need to highlight this idea of social distancing. I prefer to call it physical distancing. And can you kind of put some stuff out there, Mark, because you're an influencer and you can reach a lot of people. They were reaching out to all these influencers, didn't they? So today I felt energized by that. And I was, okay, let's get some funny memes together. How can we get this message out in a way that will spread? And I think the danger there is kind of like displacement activity is not actually feeling my fear for myself and my wife particularly, and instead being a kind of putting some busyness on top of that, which is part of my pattern anyway, right? My pattern as a person is very active, very yang, very doing. You know, there's a case for the yin mode and the case for the yang, and often people are just going deeper into their patterns. So that's what I'm watching out for is, am I just keeping busy? There's a few other things to watch out for that I've seen as well. The sort of the appeal of the authoritarian, you know, like the whole world's been turned into a police state and we're all like sort of cheering it on. That's kind of interesting to me. All of a sudden people want clarity and direction because they're scared. So it's like, give us a clear direction. I think there's some risks in that too.
I think part of what you're speaking to is that we've all found our own ways to cope with stress and distress. We've all got our, you know, to use the lingo, we've all got our own trauma patterns. And the way that I regulate my nervous system may not be the same way that you regulate your nervous system. and that when my ability to self-regulate is overwhelmed, I may attempt to self-regulate by imposing restrictions or conditions on you because I need you to help me co-regulate because my capacity to self-regulate is overwhelmed. And so that's part of what I'm starting to see is that particularly between people whose sort of go-to strategies in a pinch are not the same, is that there can be conflict arising from that. Would you please stop doing blah, blah, blah? Yeah. But I have to do blah, blah, blah. It's how I'm staying sane. But how you're staying sane is driving me crazy.
So I think this is a compassion increasing question, isn't it? Like, is what I'm seeing an attempt at self-regulation? Mm-hmm. So let's take the famous toilet roll buying. Now, people were very scathing of this, in quite a classist way, I would find. And then I kind of pointed out, like, hey, like if people are used to buying things to make them happy, and they're just doing what they know in an attempt to feel safe, and what could be more soothing than the soft paper you wipe your ass with? These people are literally shitting themselves, and maybe that's because they know what poverty's like more than you do. And actually, maybe I could have some compassion for that as an attempt to feel better, an attempt to gain control when feeling out of control, even if it might look silly from the outside.
Yeah. I remember having that thought as I was standing in line at the grocery store, and the person in front of me had their cart absolutely overflowing with stuff. And I had a couple of items that were sort of essentials that I'd run out of. And I remember my first impulse was to judge them. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, what are you doing? Why are you hoarding? Don't you know that that we're creating this problem of access to resources ourselves by engaging in this? And then two little kids ran up to the cart. I went, oh, she's got kids. She might have more than two kids, and she's brought her kids to the grocery store because she can't find, I'm imagining this story in my head about why she's doing what she's doing. That was very different from my initial impulse, which was judgmental and sort of assuming that she and her behavior was part of the problem, rather than having compassion for a story that I knew nothing about. And so that's part of what I'm trying to remind myself to practice as I go through my daily life, is that we're coping in different ways, and you don't know what I need to cope. You don't know what I need to feel okay. And so maybe we can just give each other a little bit more breathing room.
Right. And we have a practice, right? Like all four of us, like Rafe's used to jumping out of trees. This is a man that can deal with stress. It's like, Ilan, you've had a hell of a life. You've got a whole set of tools and resources. The other people don't. Like, Ray, we teach this stuff. Like I'm teaching centering for a living for the last 15 years. Like, I should be more tooled up, right? There's some skills that I have. I've been noticing that the EFC community, it's one of my main embodiment communities, have been responding really well. And I thought, okay, why is that? Because we make them aware of their patterns under pressure. Mm-hmm. We give them tools. It's a martial arts-based course. We give them tools for handling pressure and stress. And now they're looking at this like their practice. One of my students was saying today on a call, oh, I'm such a control freak, and this is such a great surrender practice. This is like enforced surrender. And I'm like, wow, that's a very different frame than everything's gone to shit, I've got to go get panic and get something. She's looking at it as a practice in itself, and she has tools to cope, which to me is like one of the wonderful things we can bring. And also I'd say this is an opportunity for embodiment people, somatic folks that have some tools. It's like, if you can be the person who's keeping your head when everyone else is losing it, but people look to you for leadership. That's what I've been seeing a lot the last 2 weeks.
It's really surfing intensity, and to some extent it's a recovery of the own nervous system. I would even say it's recovery from layers of civilization, because we are not only designed for crisis, but I would say we were designed in crisis. This was when our nervous system was in highest attention to the circumstances. So this kind of, can I be overwhelmed and at the same time there the most in my element? And for example, when we go through different regulation practices, mine is very uncreative. It's just shaking. It's just, okay, what do mammals do when the desert or the ocean was stressful, shaking? And I really responded to this corona overwhelm also with the thrill of, here I am made in this. I know exactly what to do. Just getting through my superficial story of I won't die, because I will die for sure. Who knows when? And there is something very moving in experiencing our nervous systems in their capacity and willingness to go into the situation instead of shutting down.
Thank you. Anything else on sort of creative response? I'm also seeing a huge opportunity right here. And I want to be clear, I don't mean this with any callousness. I suffered myself when I had either the virus or something very similar. There was a couple of scary days for me, and I've got 2 students that have it right now who, I'm concerned about. So I don't say this with any callousness. And there's a real opportunity. Like some of those students of mine who moved quickly and were able to set up online yoga classes, or people that had a leadership opportunity, or they were able to set up something for children because all of a sudden all these parents had children at home. And Isis, one of my colleagues and students, she set up this online kids class in Dutch. 100 kids were there the first time, 200 the next time, right? So there's this huge opportunity here as well, which I think is kind of interesting. If you're not totally in reactivity, if I've been complimented a lot the last week on my generosity. Now, this for me is just normal. I haven't got any more generous, I don't think. I've been putting stuff out, the courses, the online courses and circles, but I always do that. But somehow it's been noticed more. Anything on this opportunity we're in?
It might be a self-regulation practice of, this is not about me. My work is not about me making ends meet. My work is about reaching my tribe, and then getting nourished by other resources coming from the same tribe somehow back. But there is something of my regulation of, whoa, I'm still fully functioning, and maybe even more than before. So again, this generosity as some kind of regulation practice is something that I like a lot, especially in our patterns of individualism and separation. Which
I don't think it's just me. It seems like the separation's broken down a little bit, like the girl give me a phone number, helping with a bag. I do see a flow of dana, of generosity happening right now.
Exactly.
As well as the contraction of, I've got to get all the stuff for my family and no one else and fuck everybody else.
I think there's an interesting relationship between opportunity and responsibility, right? So like you can look at this in a very cold sort of capitalist way, right? A lot of the flow of capital is disturbed. And in general, everyone in the market is going to suffer, but the capital is going to flow in erratic ways. And if you get yourself into the right places, then you can benefit from that. And you could say that that's just opportunism, but you could also say that there's many places now where needs are not being met. And that if you're the person who's smart enough and who cares enough to go be responsive to those needs, that can help you financially in the long run, but also you're doing what needs to be done for the community.
Yeah.
And if you can hold those two, I think, there's a lot to be gained as an individual.
Yeah. Yeah. And everything's disrupted, right? So the way I explained this to one of my students, I said, listen, anything you liked in your life a month ago is now at threat. Anything you didn't like a month ago, you can now change easier because it's all looser. As they say in June, Frank Herbert's great book, it's beginnings of very delicate times, because a little input can make a lot of output down the road when it's difficult to change something. But now it's easy to change something because everything's already disturbed. And that's a wonderful thing, but also a worrying thing, like relationships, right? Me and my wife are renegotiating our relationship right now. Being right, she's not at work, she's in the house much more, different circumstances. It's an opportunity, but it's also like, well, that relationship was pretty good before, so
Yeah, it's putting fat tails on all of our behavior, if that makes sense to you guys. Like, sorry. So basically, imagine if you know some basic things, like if you look at hitting a billiard ball, right, with a stick, if you know how much force there is, you know how much friction there is, you can calculate where the ball will go fairly easily. Now, if you look at the second time that you hit, you need much more precise calculations. If you look at the third time you hit, it gets very, very precise. You get to the 64th and you'd have to account for every electron in the universe. So when you have these beginnings, when many things can happen, the sensitivity to what's coming down the pipe of the initial inputs gets much larger. So the variability of outcomes in your relationship, in your business, in your personal life, etc., is much larger in a situation like this because there's so many knock-on effects of what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And so it's a time to be very, very attentive, right? And very aware.
There's a natural increased awareness, isn't there? Like, pay attention. This matters now. Life and death, and also big consequences financially, relationally.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, Rafe, do you have any thoughts on the sort of relational side? People in intimate relationships, people who are now stuck at home with someone, people who have a partner who's in a trauma response. I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. And maybe what I'll do is I'll segue a little bit from what Rafe has been saying about crisis being this combination of danger and opportunity, and that the potential for our choices now having this ripple effect that is less predictable because there are so many moving parts. I think part of what we can learn from that, from understanding that we are poised in a moment where there are these opportunities, is that part of the opportunity when patterns get disrupted is for creativity. It's to use this as a wake-up call, to notice the rigid patterns. Ilan, I just think that you've just spoken so beautifully to waking up and looking at our lives and the superficial, rigid strangeness that many of us, I think, live our lives within, including our relationships. And they may be rigid, predictable, conventional, normative, bound with all of these kinds of rules and expectations, because that's how we were raised and that's how we do relationships, because we were socialized to believe that there were really only a few patterns available to us for being with others. And so we've stayed within those fairly rigid, predictable relational strategies. Or we can go, wow, nothing's the same. I now have to be with my partner and my kids and my dog, 24/7. And that's never happened before. Or I now am away from my family members or my friends, and that's never happened before.
Quick break to tell you about our program. So as well as the podcast, we have various kinds of online training. So we have the Embodied Yoga Principles online training, as well as in-person training. Embodied Yoga Principles for yogis who want to get yoga off the mat, specialize in the psychology of yoga, unique postures. It's a 5-day training. We have one in Brighton, one in Berlin, and one in Austin, Texas. So if you go to Embodied Yoga Principles, you can find them. Also the online version of the training for people who can't make those dates. Excellent courses. The Embodied Yoga Principles training for the yogis. For the coaches and facilitators, we have the Embodied Facilitator course. This is our flagship course. We offer it in Moscow, also in the UK. A 9-month adventure, real deep dive into embodiment. It's the biggest embodiment program I do. It could be like movement people who want to work in business more. We have people like dancers and martial arts teachers come to learn more about working in mainstream settings, but also for coaches and trainers who want something really well structured, who want to work on themselves, who want to learn practical tools, learn how to work with the body in facilitation. If you can't make EFC, and it is a big ask, there's an online course we run called the Foundations of Embodiment Certification. So if you go to Embodied Facilitator, you'll find the in-person and then FEC, F-E-C, F for Freddie, E-C for Charlie, FEC. You'll come out with the foundations of embodiment certification and also do one-day events all around the world. So I'm just about to do a tour to Slovenia, Berlin, Copenhagen, Brussels, Amsterdam, and Brighton. The Brighton one is £10, which is like $15. So if you're coming from abroad, that could make that affordable. The Brighton one's always like a really big fun one, so that's coming up. Again, go to the Embodied Facilitator course to see all of these events. And we have a little online evening as well. If people just want a taster, again, that's £10. That's a 3-hour thing coming up as well. Embodiedfacilitator.com, embodiedfacilitator.com, and you'll find all those events or embodied yoga principles for the yoga ones. Okay, so that's the stuff that I sell. Oh, and the book, the embodiment book. If you want to get my book and learn about embodiment through reading, you can also get the embodiment book available at Amazon and no good bookstores. So yeah, there we go. Excuse the interruption, and back to the episode.
And so what I think this can be an opportunity for is to say, how do I start to infuse more creativity in how I understand my relationships with other people? Not as, oh my God, my relationships are all being threatened. But, oh, given that this moment is asking us to reimagine things differently because we have to, what else maybe would benefit from some reimagining? What other things need to be interrogated or explored or raised as possibilities? And I think when that attitude of, oh, what's happening here? Anything could happen. I think that's part of what's wonderful, particularly in a significant, sometimes it's a romantic relationship, but not always. Maybe it's just when you're meeting a friend and all of a sudden, a new friend, and it's like, everything's really exciting because anything could happen, right? We're at this moment again, and we could just hunker down and, grit our teeth and manage to survive in our existing relational patterns with the people who are already in our lives. Or we could go, what else might I do? And how might I do what I'm already doing differently in a way that infuses creativity and life and juice and energy and real attentiveness back into my life. So,
how can we use this to improve our sex lives?
Yeah.
I love the willpower and the focus you're speaking with so much, so close to my heart, this kind of, we don't owe the last generation doing it exactly like it did it. Let's reinvent it. And there's like something, there is so much suffering and death around in this Corona crisis. And there is this bitter, potent medicine of let's not fall asleep after that. Let's not do that. Let's never hand relationships and intimacy back to Hollywood again. Let's not do that again.
Yes.
What's going to be different after this? This is one of the things I've been thinking about. Like, for example, just a little one. All the yoga teachers who have now learned to work online, they're not going back to working for a studio. What the fuck would that? Is out of the bag now?
I think we learn in a YouTube video how to shake each other's hands. Right. And say, really? And does it hurt? And we say, no, it's totally
people used to touch each other's hands? That's disgusting.
I touched my screen. I love it. Yeah.
What could be changed after this? Like relationship to education, just little things like we're on Zoom now. I've been using Zoom a few years. The conference was big for Zoom, but Daniela from the conference has been the most sought after consultant of the last 2 weeks, teaching half the world how to use Zoom. It's now become a verb. I'm going to Zoom you, like Google something. And people are used to Zoom now. Embodiment people are used to Zoom, right? So it's like 2 years ago at the conference, people said, you can't do an embodiment conference on Zoom. That's absurd. People were literally saying, ha, 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 in the comments of the adverts and stuff we were putting out. Ha, 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 embodiment online, that's stupid. And like some real trolling. And now it's just like everyone and his dog's doing it. So I can't imagine that we can't put that cat back in the bag. Maybe relationships will be changed. A lot of marriages will break up. They say in China, there's been a lot of divorces. Health, people are looking, will we be more worried, concerned with our nervous systems and our health? Will that become like a bigger deal? Like politically, that could go. I think we could end up with some pretty totalitarian stuff in place that started off as a temporary measure, and now it's bigger. Now it's more permanent. So, I mean, what might be like after this? Rafe, by the way, when is likely to be after this? This is the question everyone's asking, and I think you've got the best guess, which is still probably not a good guess, but it's the best one we got. So, when is after this?
Okay. Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that people should be very skeptical of models. Like, we like to put numbers together and say, okay, this is the number. What are the error bars on that number? And when we have something that has a lot of uncertainty, we don't know. So I'll give you my best guess, but people should think not just about what the best guess is, but how much variation there is around that guess. So if you completely shut everything down, a couple of the guys who I follow, Nassim Taleb and Bar Yahim, I think I can't remember his name off the top of my head, they think you could pretty much contain the virus in 4 weeks. But it's going to take longer than that to know that you've contained the virus. There's essentially very few new cases that are happening in China right now. In China, I think actually there were no new cases that were from community transmission in China a couple days ago. They've been in quarantine for 51 days or 52 days, and they're starting to open quarantines in the least affected areas.
And they're strict. I'm not sure if we can even do that in Britain and America.
Yeah, so it may have to last longer here, or you may see that the quarantines get tighter, but then the quarantine has to last longer because we didn't tighten it enough to begin with. The Imperial report said basically that we're looking at something like 18 months of potential quarantines. What I expect to happen is that there's going to be 3 to 4 months where the quarantine is going to be very tight. And then we're going to be able to loosen things quite substantially, but that there's going to continue to be like you'll probably have, like, if you work at a big office, you might have to take your temperature every time that you go to the office. And that will continue to be true. And there'll be local outbreaks, and cities and areas will get shut down for brief periods of time while they track and trace all of those outbreaks. And we'll be seeing that until we get a vaccine or some other kind of medicine. And the most likely scenario for the vaccine is somewhere between 18 to 24 months from now.
So let's just, listeners, someone's going, hey, I've got a yoga retreat, martial arts camp booked for August. Is that going to happen?
Possibly. I think it's possible. We have one that's booked in the beginning of August, and my current guess is there's probably about a 35% chance that it goes.
And if someone said, hey, I've got one booked for December?
Probably.
17.
Yeah.
Okay, I know we're all guessing. I won't hold you to any of this. No one sue Rafe, okay, listening. This is just someone trying to help out who I think's looked at the numbers kind of logically with his big brain. So I hope that helps a few people out. We can't plan everything, but we can make some guesses, right? Like, I've just cancelled a course in May because it's not going to fucking happen, right?
May,
so better I cancel early, right?
June, very likely not. Is my guess. I actually wanted to loop back, if you don't mind, while I have the floor, to something Ray was talking about earlier about the need for compassion for people who are coping in different ways. And I think this is an important point, but we have to look at the opposite too, which is that, like, we can operate as individuals and we can operate as a group. And sometimes we have to move from a very individual orientation to a very group focus. And this is one of those times where, I'm under very little threat from this virus, right? And if there's lots of young men right now, probably more young men than women, but lots of young women too. You can see them on the beaches of Florida right now, who are like, look, this isn't a threat to me. I'm not going to not party. I'm not going to not have fun. And
because you're healthy, you're not going to die if you get it. You're one of the healthy guy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the likelihood's very low, right? So you have to act. The ethical way to act is towards the systemic risk, not towards the individual risk. And in order to do that, we have to start thinking and behaving to some degree as a collective. And so a more collectivist mindset, a more authoritarian mindset is actually, it's not necessarily what you want long-term, and it has costs. I'm definitely not saying it doesn't have costs, but it's actually adaptive. And it may be the case that the problems of not doing that are much worse than the problems of doing it. And I do think that what we see down the road is is a very different world. Like universal healthcare was first proposed after the Spanish flu. So I think if a Democrat is elected in the next election here in the States, universal healthcare is in. That debate is over. But on the flip side, there's been this globalist idea where it's like you can't have borders, and every European country has just discovered that they can have borders. Yep. And there's a time when you need to have borders. And xenophobia is a behavioral response of your immune system. And there's some really dark sides to that. Really, really dark sides to it. If you ever want to scare yourself, watch Jordan Peterson's presentation on conscientiousness and the Nazis. I watched that on my way to Germany.
Hygiene behaviors, yeah. So often in genocides, they talk about rats and cockroaches and the disgust response. And there's some real research on this, actually, isn't there? And similar language across different genocides where human beings become seen as to be eliminated as a health threat, essentially.
Yeah, this could definitely empower the worst elements of the ethno-nationalist right. But on the flip side, there also may need to be a reorientation towards the idea that we need to be able to go to local control and shut down, right? We have to respect the systems at both levels is, I guess, what I'm saying. But I think that whatever you see, it's going to be different than what we saw before this. It's going to change people's, and the children who are raised in this are going to have a very different kind of way of looking at these things.
It's interesting. In a crisis, I've seen people want dictatorial leadership, but they want everyone to behave like socialists. And there's a sort of very interesting dynamic of kind of liberal conservative that happens. People generally get more conservative in the wider sense, in the sense of like restricting boundaries, looking after family, the importance of local community. And there's risks to that, as you say, isn't there? And equally, this is also this pull towards communal, communitarian values based around what's good for the collective. I think this is why some of the Asian countries have done so well in this. Yeah. Japan's done really well in this. Singapore's done really well in this. It's like there's various factors around hygiene and culture, and they bow in Japan rather than shaking hands, stuff like that. But I think a lot of it's they've got that strong collectivist way of looking at like what's good for everyone. Like one of my Asian friends told this to me. He said, listen, the reason we sometimes wear masks and, you white guys laugh at us is what he said. We do that for you. So we wear a mask so you don't get infected by us, not the other way around. And I thought, oh, wow, I haven't even, like in my individualist perspective, I hadn't even imagined that's why the average Japanese on the commute wears a mask. It's because they don't want to give you their germs.
Which is extremely kind, right?
Right.
It's very admirable.
Wow. So there's a lot here. Any predictions for the future? How will touch be after this? How will we get more conservative sexual mores? Will handshaking become reserved for intimate friends? Will massage become something that that you have to have a test before you do it? Like, how this might impact some of these areas?
I have no idea, and I maybe didn't think about it enough. But what I like about this withdrawing from touch is that we are instantly reminded of the power of touch anyway. It's like now it's a potential effect on another human system when I shake his hands. No, it has always been. And there is something that I, again, love as a challenge of when the two of us are in 1.5 meter distance. It's not that we do not sense each other. It's not that we do not feel each other. It's just that we somehow can't use our normal kind of intimate, sexual, physical hyperstimulation and then say, hey, we're really good friends or we have really sex. There is something around, okay, I have no other choice but reinventing what do I sense. And from there, it's again this like reanimation of the whole sensory nervous system that we have and that I'm designed for living in a jungle and of course knowing what's going on in the other corner of the forest because I have to. This is just survival. This is not spirituality. This is not esoteric or subtle stuff. So I'm very, very interested in facing this challenge and maybe even exploring it in a way of teaching it, of how can we feel touched beyond the touch of our skin? Because skin is not where touch begins. It's where touch in most cases ends. And just another footnote, just because I was so on fire with what you shared, Ray. I do have some kind of worry on this kind of lockdown on intimate relationships, because we regulate in ourselves by having very strong own boundaries and an own territory, and from there merging with another person. If this separating of territories is no more available to us because nobody can leave the house, we have to teach about healthy boundaries in intimate relationships with more awareness for our responsibility than we did before. So there is something where I think this is a huge, huge embodiment coaching necessity through the internet.
My wife and I have definitely established territories in the household and shared spaces.
Great. But this is why you...
This is my office. This is my man shed. But she's like, here late tonight, but not in the day. But
where are the animal heads?
Yeah, on the gun rack on the wall.
Oh,
and you know, what you said about being able to be intimate online, we're definitely seeing this. When I was teaching these classes about how to work online, there was embodiment teachers saying, but surely you can't feel people online, and how do you connect with people online? I've felt this has been a very connected conversation, for example, like a meeting of friends and colleagues, and you know, there's a way in which there's a skill there. I think people are getting better at that skill, getting intimate and connected online. And what we found with the conference is people said, oh, it was deeper than I thought. Or the embodiment cycles was deeper than I thought. So people are realizing that depth is possible without physically, as you say, touching skin to skin. I'm also hoping it might lead to an increased consent culture around touch, that because touch is perceived as a bigger deal, people don't just touch each other without, like, I've had friends go, are you hugging? Are you fist bumping? There was a real respect for my boundary there. I thought, that's nice. Maybe you could do it the rest of the time, hippies. Stop hugging me.
Yeah.
It's kind of a random thought, but I want to interject this. So I was thinking about stocks that you would want to buy and stocks that you want to sell, right? So like, okay, buy Zoom, buy Amazon, buy Netflix. And then originally I was like, short Tinder, right? Don't buy Tinder. Or Tinder. But then I was like, maybe not, right? Like, people aren't going to shouldn't be hooking up. One hopes they're not hooking up. But maybe that's actually becomes a really strong form of entertainment for people, right? You can they're still going to be swiping right,
kind of danger fun as well, isn't it? Like, ooh, risky fun.
Because people are going to have a lot of time, right? And what are they going to do it with? Maybe it's going to be trying to find attractive strangers on the internet to have sexy conversations with because you're stuck in your own house.
For thermometer as soon as they come in the door. Hand gel. Okay. All right. So what do we, as we sort of move towards close here, kind of 10, 15 minutes, what do we want to kind of give out as a message to people? Like, I just want to encourage people. I want to say, hey, I know this is a tough time for a lot of us, and, you know, encourage people to, you know, a lot of change happening. I know it can be scary, and I encourage the teachers by saying, hey, you've got a lot of the resources to teach online if you're used to teaching in person. A lot of these self-regulation skills you can help other people with.
I want to share something that I discovered deeper due to my own challenge with the corona crisis. And that is that I was going by the theory or knowledge that I, of course, am also the daughter of a wounded and traumatized and stressed out and burned out culture. So there was some kind of knowledge in the background. Oh, my parents have also been in the fight and flight mode. And there is some kind of transgenerational helplessness around outer circumstances. So now I had to wake up to this having a real impact 24/7 in my life. And that helps me a lot, because when the next wave of coronavirus information, I'm like the wife of the two of you guys. I'm like, don't tell me the numbers. I freak out. And let's go by this example. I freak out. Okay, Ilan, one part of you is freaking out because you will die and you don't know why and you have no control. Yes. And the other part is not new around your freaking out. It's just in a new wave coming to the surface in your consciousness, in my awareness. So that helps me, because then I can stand there with this full wave of information overload and overwhelm, and I can shake as if I could do still something. And if it's the last thing on earth, I shake. And after 3 minutes of standing there, breathing, shaking my head, shaking my panic, shaking my helplessness, there is another perception of the experience, of the situation, of the information. And I want to share that, because even if I can shake 50% off of the charge of an information, hey, 50%, wow. So this is what I want to share, just shaking in helplessness.
Thank you.
What comes to my mind is fear is a gift. People are afraid of panicking. We have this culture that shames people for panicking, and we think that reacting to something or proacting towards something is panicking. And this is a very bad idea, right? There's a wonderful book called Gavin de Becker that talks about this, right? If you ignore the signals when you need to pay attention to them, you set yourself up in a much more difficult situation in the long run, right? If you're starting to feel fear about this, don't deaden yourself to it. Think about how you can integrate it towards action that can make your life and the lives around you better and safer. I'm still focused on the pragmatic level. We are not doing enough social distancing. Thousands of people are likely to die because people are failing to take the actions that they need to right now.
This is what the NHS are begging me to tell people. They were begging me last night saying, we're dying, we're in hospitals, it's full up, we're at risk, people are at risk, keep the fuck away from each other. That's what they were saying. It doesn't have to be we lose intimacy. We can still keep communication. Sorry to jump in, Ray, but this really feel really strongly about this. Like, these are like very cool, calm doctors, and they're literally sending me messages like, tell everyone this.
Yeah. How you process this emotionally right now is important. But the first layer of importance to that is that you're doing it in such a way that you're actually taking the actions that matter, right? And the biggest one for me is recognizing that fear is a gift. This is something that I think that the parkour practice has helped teach me, because if I wasn't afraid, I would be dead. So we need to recognize the power of this. Martial arts is the same thing, right? If you fight for real, you better be afraid a little bit. But if you're too afraid, you do things that don't work and that make you in more danger. And a lot of times the reason you're too afraid is because you didn't listen to the signal of fear early enough. You stuffed it down, right? Become afraid of the bad man when he walks in the room, not when he's next to you with a knife pressed to you. And become afraid of this virus in January if you could, but if not, now.
Harness your fear.
Harness and work with it.
Yeah. And so let's broaden that out to include all kinds of embodied somatic responses, because part of what we've been talking about in this conversation is, where's the opportunity for those of us who have expertise and skill around embodiment practices, and what is this opportunity teaching us beyond just coping for a little while and then moving back to business as usual? Because I think that that's gone. It seems to me that one of the possibilities that we could be paying attention to, if we listened to our fear, to our worry, to our creativity, to our energy, is that we have an opportunity to be fully embodied and engaged with others online. And I think that that's, I mean, you pointed to that, Mark, earlier, that people didn't think that that was possible. But in fact, we know that it is. And so we have an opportunity that we're all going online for sure. I think that's inevitable. This has given us a huge push jump into the online world. The question is that going to be a disembodied one or potentially an embodied one? And I think that's the opening, that's the avenue that those of us who are in love with the lived experience of the body and all that it brings us, I think that's the opportunity that we have.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. We had announced at the beginning of this year, New Year's Day, we said, let's make the 20s the embodiment decade. And some people now might be thinking, well, there's no chance of that now. Actually, I'm thinking the opposite. I'm thinking this is going to bring communities of embodiment together. This is going to have people really see the value of their practice. It's going to show up, those who have embodied leadership skills, self-regulation skills is really showing up. maybe I'll just end with some resources here for people. Do people have any more final thoughts before I offer out a whole bunch of resources? And I'll give a shout out for you guys, any resources too. Okay, so a few things we've put out there. So we've put out this how to move your work online. That's been incredibly popular. We've made it completely free, no email sign up or anything. That's on the internet. It's embodiedfacilitator.com resources-for-embodiment. Or if you just find my social media, you'll get it. If you get my newsletter, you'll get sent a copy. Reach out to me if you can't find it. It might be a little bit hard to Google. And we've got experiences from yoga teachers, dance teachers, Daniela's top Zoom tips from the Zoom mistress, different workshops we've done on leadership, yoga teachers talking about being on camera and how they move to online, web designers talking about all the systems you can get. So that's super useful if you just got that practical challenge right now. I've done a bunch of videos for people. So there's a video meditation if you've got the coronavirus, a meditation specifically designed to alleviate a little bit of the suffering of people that have that virus, which is quite creative. Some stuff on leadership we've put on the YouTube channel. If you go to the Embodiment channel on YouTube, centering, working with the fear response, resilience, kind of stuff around how to be more resilient, kind of techniques that can help as well as normal medical advice. So that is out there. We also have the embodiment circles. These are free to all. There's 80 of them a week, and they're in 17 languages. So if you want to get online and connect with other people, it's gentle movement, gentle meditation, and nice sharing. Really just like a positive online environment if you want to get away from the negativity, social media, looking at too many news articles. Just go online for an hour. And if you go to embodimentcircle.com, and then there's an online thing you can look at there, and it shows you the whole schedule. There's like what is that, like 8 a day or something? So plenty of opportunity to connect. In terms of other resources out there, Rebel Wisdom is a YouTube channel that's putting a lot of really high quality. If you like the kind of stuff Rafe's talking about, they're putting out some very kind of high quality information about this. And obviously there's all the normal public health websites. Has anyone else got resources or things they think would be useful for people right now?
If people are looking to find ways to train on their own outdoors, we've got all our programs discounted right now, so people can check that out. I have a article on my website for people in the movement community on how to deal with coronavirus, how to understand it. That needs to be updated, but we're going to try to update and keep resources there for people to stay up to date with what's going on. I'm posting tons of stuff on social media. So if you want to follow me on social media, I can point you to, or send me a message and I can point you to the people who I think are the most valuable follows, because there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of information that's not necessarily the most up-to-date or the best.
It's a hell of a time to be discerning, right? This is the ability to discern information is really life-saving right now.
Yeah.
Right. Any resources or things you want to point people to?
Not an online resource that I'm aware of, but maybe for those moments when viewers of this realize that they actually need to go off screen for a while. And particularly, I think it's important, you alluded to this earlier, Mark, that people whose social identities put them at the margins of things because they're poor or they're queer or they're a person of color or they're an immigrant or they're underhoused, that I think it's really important that folks who may be struggling more than usual because they feel not well connected, not well resourced, and perhaps not really fully understanding the degree to which their traumatic life experiences of oppression have positioned them to just a little higher up at the top edge of their window of tolerance, how important it would be to reach out to their communities, to feel some solidarity and some connection, and to find ways to connect with material that actually supports a little bit of their lived experience. And there's lots out there. If you Google somatics and social justice, for example, there's lots of information there that I think might be good reading material in times like this.
Thank you for bringing that in. There's definitely groups who are more vulnerable for some of the stuff we've been talking about. Huh?
Exactly.
Ilan, anything you want to point people to?
I love those vagal nerve exercises from Keleman. He published them in his book about the vagal nerve, and they're incredibly easy. I mean, we are not allowed to sit around in buses anymore, but even in buses we could do them because they are so like invisible and highly effective. So just something like that as a somatic prayer or mantra for exhaling. And the other thing is just an invitation of reach out to people in the internet who are in some form connected to embodiment. And for example, in my YouTube channel, a lot of stuff is published in German. I start a little bit with English, but I feel so delighted when now people come with questions, because it's like we have no live seminars. Our schedule is empty and it should be full because this is my.
How do they find you, Ilan? So it's Evolve, Move, Play for Rafe, Pacifica University for Ray Johnson, right? They can find you there. And where do they find you, Ilan?
Ilan Stephani on YouTube or kaliskiss.com or Facebook.
K-A-L-I, yeah. K-A-L-I. Cool. Okay. Well, all these people will be at the Embodiment Conference. We may well hear them on other dialogues. And this has been, despite the real seriousness of the topic, an absolute delight to host a dialogue between, the four of us like this. So genuinely, guys, thank you so much. This has been a very rich evening for me. So really appreciate your time. Stay well. And I'll see you on the other side of this.
Thank you, Mark.
Virtual fist bumps, virtual hugs. See you later. Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on the embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.